As the share of capture fisheries in the global fish production is stagnant and declining, aquaculture contributes a fast and growing opportunity. And that's what we want to explore. Around the world, innovations are helping to scale up aquaculture production. Kenya, for example, needs to double its production of fish by 2030 just to maintain the per capita consumption at 2010 levels. And that's a long time ago. Yet intensive aquaculture is still uncommon in East Africa, and aquaculturists face many challenges. In this expedition, we will explore examples of how new companies in different places are rising up to face the challenges, provide solutions, and how aquaculture production can be scaled using new technology. On that note, I'm delighted to introduce our panelists and commentators today. So we are joined by Dave Okech, who describes himself as a farmer and an aquapreneur. He is the founder and CEO of Kenya-based startup, Aquaculture. Aquaculture uses, or rather infuses, Internet of Things, farm management, and use of high-quality feeds to improve the productivity of small-scale fish farmers, and then linking the produced fish to traders. Then we are also joined by commentators. So Joyce Leo, a marine scientist at Umitron, an aquaculture tech startup based in Singapore and Japan. So we're infusing another startup from a different region. Joyce has extensive experience in marine life conservation and developing practical and beneficial solutions for improving aquaculture farming, including facilitating aquaculture insurance products. She's based in Singapore. Umitron, similar to Aquaculture in some ways, builds user-friendly data platforms for aquaculture by using Internet of Things, satellite imagery and sensing, and AI technology to help farmers improve farm efficiency and manage environmental risks and access to markets. Then we're also joined by Flor. Has Flor joined us, or she'll be joining us? So Flor is a director of global regenerative business at TechnoServe. She's also the lead author of Blue Entrepreneurship Scoping Study for Kenya, which was published by IUCN a few weeks ago on World Oceans Day. TechnoServe, a lot of you may be familiar with, is a nonprofit organization that takes a business approach to fighting for poverty by empowering smallholder farmers and entrepreneurs to improve value of what they produce and strengthen their role in larger markets. So I'll kick off the discussion with a few questions to Dave before we get to hear from Joyce as well. And Dave, maybe you can start with a bit of a background. So what motivated you to start Aquaculture, and what role does Aquaculture play in the aquaculture space?
Well, thank you very much, Shirley, and good afternoon, everyone. 4 years, about 6 years ago, I joined farming in Lake Victoria as a cage fish farmer. And in the process of farming, a lot of things came up, some of which I knew never existed, but only to my surprise were challenges that were real in the system. You will imagine that if you are farming fish, you basically grow the fish and feed the fish and channel it to the market. But there's more complexity that you face as a smallholder in trying to achieve that simple task. This included lack of top quality feeds that we were desperately looking for. A lot of us were still going through guesswork in terms of basic farm management practices, the good aquaculture practices, that simple things like how to sample fish and determine how much feed it should consume on a particular day, things that can make or break a farmer, especially the ones operating at small scale or even large scale. I mean, the market was terribly unstructured. As much as traders were shouting on the other side, looking for us with our fish, we couldn't find them. There was no medium for communication. So facing those challenges and the desire to see an all-inclusive aquaculture sector in Kenya precipitated the need to develop a platform that will then connect all these industry players so we can talk to each other. And that's what Aquaculture is aiming to achieve in the aquaculture sector.
Thank you, Dave. Before we actually go into further questioning, may I just ask for your feedback? So we try to really structure these conversations to be helpful to the people that are participating. We'd like you to just take part in a short poll so we can know who's in the room to better structure future conversations. Carmen, could you help me present that poll and then we go back to the discussion? Thank you. Great. So I think we can just present the poll. So it looks like there's a mix of everyone. We have entrepreneurs in the room, we have capital providers, research, and others. So when you're posing questions, please note the questions could go to the larger audience in that form, or even our panelists. So Dave, back to you, and apologies for that. Thank you for that introduction. So I wanted to find out, it would be great to know, could you define the profile of aquaculturists you serve? And you touched on some of the biggest pain points you saw in the market. So it would be great to learn that. And as well, just because last week we were talking about fisher folk, are there any difference? So are the profiles different from the fisher folk that also exist in the same ecosystem?
Thank you very much, Shirley. So the word smallholder fish farmer is very relative, depending on where you are and the context in which you're operating from. But if we look at the case of Kenya, for example, you will say a smallholder fish farmer produces what? Between 300 kilograms per cycle to about 10 tons per cycle. And most of these farmers go through 13 to 16 months production cycle per year. In most cases, they use sinking mash feed, which becomes a problem because of the low FCR factor of it and the environmental pollution that comes to that. Fish farming is done mostly also as an economic activity alongside others that they do. Mm-hmm. And so some do on the land-based farming, which is pond culture, and some do it on the lake, which is cage culture. There's an obvious difference between fish farmers and fishers or fishermen is on the way they get the fish. One group called the fish farmers, they farm the fish or culture it in a restricted area, whereas the fishermen hunt for it in a large water pool resource like Lake Victoria. However, due to environmental challenges that have put pressure on amount of fish that the increased population needs to consume around large water bodies, you find more fishermen do not have access to that fish because it is overfished and is non-existent. So they turn to be fish farmers. And the question is, how do we bring more fishermen to farm the fish in a sustainable way and continue joining the fish farming or the fish culture team?
Yeah. Great. So essentially, fish farmers and the small scale aqua farmers that you serve are similar in profile because they sort of do the same thing. So fishers become fish farmers in the long run to sustain their well-being.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not much of a choice if you are live by the lakeside or if you have access to water as a resource and land, and you are predominantly a fish farmer, a fisherman. Fish farming or aquaculture is the best route right now as we stand to access fish, either for home consumption and for trade as an economic activity.
Thank you, Dave. And you mentioned sinking mash feed. Could you maybe expound on what that is for those that may not understand the terms in this space?
Exactly. So we have two types of feed. I normally say so. One is the high quality extruded floating pellets. These are feeds that are produced out of good quality soy and the rest, and have a high floatability, are pre-cooked, and so have a high feed conversion ratio in the body of the fish. A lot of farmers struggle to access this fish because in Kenya, most of this fish feed is produced outside the country. Whereas most farmers resolve to produce fish at their own backyard by buying different raw materials and trying to build a concoction out of that. And through that, then producing sinking mash feed, which is basically unpelleted feed and does not float, or the floatability is very low. When that happens, you get almost 30% of that feed is lost due to sinking factor when you're feeding the fish. That contributes towards cost of production. High cost of production is also contributes towards what you call greenhouse gas emission, because it runs down to pollute the lakes and the rivers because most of it is unconsumed or not eaten by the fish. Our platform is connecting these rural smallholder fish farmers to top quality feed manufacturers by delivering that last mile distribution between the top feed manufacturers and rural smallholder fish farmers, who are then able to reduce the production period by accessing top quality feed and be climate resilient in terms of contributing low or reducing pollution and using climate smart technology to feed their fish in a precision manner. Yeah.
Thanks, Dave. I guess I'll pose the same or similar question to Joyce. Joyce, based on the profile that Dave has described, Umitron serves different markets. You operate in Japan, Singapore, and even in South America. Are the profiles of the aquaculturalists that you serve different across the regions? Are they different from what Dave has just described? And what are their biggest pain points?
Well, I think we've actually had the privilege of working with farmers across a really wide spectrum. As you've mentioned, we're quite active in multiple regions. So we've seen the really small scale family-owned type farms, then all the way to the other extreme, which is the large scale producers, similar to what you would see in Norway. To give an idea though, in Japan, where we've had the most traction to date, we tend to find that farms are located in very rural areas. They're very small. They use like 10 by 10 meter steel cages, not even HDPE or plastic. And they often number anywhere from like 5 to maybe up to 20 for these small scale farms. And you notice that the focus is more on quality versus quantity. So very, very low stocking densities, because they believe that every fish, needs its care, and they don't want to farm in large numbers. Surprisingly, even though you think of Japan as a very tech-forward country, farms are not very tech-savvy. They don't actually use a lot of technology. They use very basic farming methodologies, and what they know is sort of family generational, like, oh, hand me down from one generation to another, like father to son, and so on, versus a very data-driven type farming. And it's also mostly male dominated, and everyone's much older. You're going to be hard pressed to find a young person under 50 working on a farm in Japan. I guess moving on from there, it's also hard for them to get product to market. The farmers struggle to find consumers, even though they have a really good quality product, and they're often affected by seasonal pricing. Then if you sort of swing the other way entirely, you've got those, like in Spain, in the UK, where they're farming in 120 meter type cages. They're large ones. They've got hundreds and hundreds of cages. One of the farms we work with has a total of 250 sites alone, just under one company. And each site has like 50 to 60 cages, and one person feeds them all. And everything is automated. Everything is, I guess AI driven to some extent. And they are very, very data centric. the more data they have, the more they can manage their farms to a very granular level. So that's kind of, you know, the wide spectrum of profiles that we've been talking to and working with.
Great. Thanks, Joyce. That's quite insightful. I believe it's the same type of profile we've also seen working in the Lake region, much older, male-dominated, very similar to the profile that you described, the rural farms. And I wanted to know, in terms of technology, you talked about them using very traditional, handed down traditions, methodologies to farm. How have you managed to get into that market and sort of move them towards, or the ones who actually adopt your products? How do you manage to get them to adopt more data-centric and technology-driven models to make them more effective?
It was really a huge mindset shift. I think there was a very long educational type program, I think, that we did. We actually went out to the farms and we realized that even showing them an underwater camera of their fish made a huge difference. They're like, so this is what my fish look like underwater. So this is how they feed. And then we took some data from other farms we worked with overseas, and we gave them an idea that this is how other farmers are using this type of behavior to track activity level and feeding. And would you like to consider something similar? You don't need to change the way you're doing it. I just want you to observe. I want you to observe how your fish are behaving, because you know it innately, but now you can put an actual data set to it. So after a period of time, they said, that's true. You know, there is a benefit to actually seeing my fish and knowing how healthy they look, being able to judge color, you know, being able to track size, things like that was a real game changer for them. And also the fact that they could take a day off and didn't have to be on the farm every day was obviously a big plus. They could take like weekends off and just leave the feeders and the AI to run it on their own and spend time with family. So I guess it was a natural progression that way.
Thanks, Joyce. And I'm sure Dave may have more questions when we give him a chance to ask around that. You talked about some of the pain points, and you talked about market being one of the pain points that they have. Are there other notable pain points that you've observed?
I think the general lack of data across the board has been a huge pain point. And related to that, it's very few farmers realize that having a lot of data is useless without any context. So if they can't make those connections and find out how the data is useful for them, it's actually detrimental to their farming instead, because they don't know what to do with the sheer amount of information and they don't know where to start. So I think that's a huge challenge to make sense of everything. And, you know, what exactly is happening on my farm? And if I don't know what's happening and I don't know how to improve it, then where is that end goal for them?
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Joyce. And back to Dave. So Dave, having looked at some of the pain points that are quite similar across the markets. So you talked about market being one of them, data being one of them. Are there other opportunities? What do you consider to be the biggest opportunities in this space?
I think there's tons and tons of opportunities in the aquaculture space. One fact is that the rate at which the African population is growing is faster than the rate at which aquaculture is growing, even though aquaculture is the fastest growing agricultural value chain in Africa as we speak at the moment. That is a problem, but also presents an opportunity for engagement into the value chain, be it from the cold chain perspective, where you're looking at bulking of fish from different farmers and providing cold chain as a solution, be it from the marketing side, where you're looking at last mile distribution of fish through either B2B or B2C forms of business models on the sector. You also look at the fintech space available, how much funds is required to facilitate or support the farmers growing the fish so that they remain resilient. And that's an opportunity that MFIs or financial institutions or organizations can explore and develop products that are suitable for small and medium-sized fish farmers, which, by the way, in Africa, we will end up with a mix of small and medium-sized fish farmers and large-scale farms. We might not take what Europe and US have taken of large-scale farms producing food for everyone. In Africa, it might be a mix or a hybrid because of the nature of land and resources. How we manage them is significantly different from how they're managed in the West. Again, you look at the input supply section of the entire value chain. There's massive opportunity there in terms of aligning yourself with either of the inputs that is needed. That includes the feed additives, include the feed itself, include the fingerlings. I mean, the number of jobs that aquaculture can produce is massive, even from that. So there are tons of opportunities. We are yet to even talk about the value addition that will come. And then lastly, there is also the element of big data that will play and plays a significant role in terms of monetizing the entire food systems around the aquaculture sector. There's also a huge opportunity for investment into big data on those platforms, because the future will rely on data a lot as a management strategy and a way to increase productivity. Yeah.
Great. I guess my other question would be around, you mentioned some of the opportunities. Are there some that require collective, like for the industry to work collectively, versus those ones that individuals like Aquaculture or Umitron could tackle?
I will say a sustainable and successful aquaculture must be collective in nature. Reason being, there's barely enough. I mean, technology cannot work without the infrastructure around it, you know, to whether support vertical integration of itself. Again, it cannot work without the actual producers of the product. So again, those who are engaged in production cannot work without the input suppliers. Then you have the marketers. So I will say there has to be a way by which the various actors in the aquaculture value chain work collectively, because the reverse of that leads to high fragmentation of the sector, which is the case currently. And when that happens, the loser is the farmer, because then he can't get value for what he has produced. Fish becomes inaccessible, and it just becomes a chaotic system, which is chaotic only on one side, but will be beneficial to others on the other side to some extent. However, if we are looking at a broad picture of sustainable and inclusive aquaculture sector, that we must find a way of being collaborative as stakeholders in the entire food system.
Great. So as we talk about this collective sort of different players playing together to make it more sustainable, could you maybe talk about what government or donor support is available in Kenya or Japan to small aquaculturists? Is there any?
So yeah, the government plays a critical factor in the success of any industry. I mean, there's always a funny saying that by the time the government comes to tax an industry, it should be moving out of that space because there's no longer any business. But the thing is that government is tasked by most countries to provide the policies that govern operationalization of particular sections of the society, including the food sector. And policies are key towards ensuring certain things happen in the right way. For example, if you look at the aquaculture sector in Kenya, there's an ongoing review of the aquaculture policy, so that you can with a good structured aquaculture regulations in a country, you give the infrastructure a space to grow, because then it defines how growth could be. This is why it's important to get not just policies, but the right policies in place that starts by involving the farmer as a key stakeholder. You don't do the policies up and bring down to the farmer. You start by the grassroots and take it up to the policymakers. So yes, governments play a critical role in that. In terms of what has the government of Kenya done to facilitate growth of aquaculture, I think back in 2010, we had the economic stimulus program. That was the first one in Kenya to prove that fish can actually be grown at home and on ponds and the rest. That program was significant in terms of passing out the information that aquaculture is real and can be done. Then there is now the Aquaculture Business Development Program that is being run by IFAD in collaboration with the government of Kenya. That is also another good program that I think the government has invested almost $150 million in collaboration with IFAD to build commercial smallholder farms in Kenya and support. It is through that program that I think cage culture and fish regulations are being drafted. These will be very critical towards ensuring, one, how do things like tariffs are exempted from inputs that contribute towards reducing production cost? How do we make sure we manage certification process so that aggregators of fish can find an organized framework for getting their fish certified to move into the market? How do you manage things to do with lake as a resource so that you make sure lake is available for everyone, large scale, small scale, transporters, fishermen, and we all sustain that lake, because it's only one lake. You kill it, everybody's out. You save it, we all live to enjoy it. So these are some of the things that can only be enforced when government policies or when regulations are put in place by the government and people support them. Yeah.
Great. So I'll pose a question to Joyce, just sort of pulling from some of the opportunities that you highlighted. And because this program is, or rather TECA is focused on creating fintech ventures, there's obviously the angle of finance being part of the solution for aquaculturists. And Dave, you mentioned it, working with MFIs to develop suitable products for the aquaculturists. Joyce, I know you've had experience in that. Could you maybe touch on some of the solutions you've seen in your space or some of the solutions you've been working on? And then obviously I will also ask whether you can touch on, are there some ways government or police or donors can be involved that are different to the way Dave described that the current ways we have in Kenya? Thanks.
Maybe I'll answer that second question first in terms of opportunities. At least in the countries that we've been working with, the agenda isn't just at national level, but it's at regional and city level as well. So you find that the country puts out a national agenda, oh, we want to transform the industry for aquaculture, but then each of those sub-tiers actually take on their own policies and they craft their own that is suited to the region specifically. So like in Ehime Prefecture is a very big farming region. They've got an aquaculture specific agenda for digital transformation in aquaculture, and they put out their own funding for those projects. Singapore, we've got our own 30 by 30 food security agenda. And then it sort of trickles down into private sectors and public sectors separately, and they each set up their own goals and strategies. And following on from that, it's also, as an end result, they've also got funds that come out of that from the private sector, which is great to see. One more would be Australia's Blue Economy CRCs, which is a collective of private sector. They would match the country's national agenda to say, if the country is pledged an estimated maybe $30 million over the next 5 years, we will match dollar for dollar to do the same because we believe in this country's goal. So I think that's something that's slightly different, but it's certainly other ways that the industry could tap into to access funding. And solutions-wise, we've seen a whole myriad of solutions that have come out of these types of funds and obviously country agenda, anything from fintech all the way to improvements in genetic stock. High-tech precision farming is obviously the ultimate goal. Biological innovations have been huge because now a lot of farmers are realizing that taking a particular species in a particular from another country may not be 100% suited to the environment. So now they're trying to create very specific environmentally catered genetic stock. A good example is Norway used to put out a lot of salmon fingerlings out to multiple different countries, and Scotland realized, oh, it's great, but my environment is stormy. I've got like typhoon level winds and totally different to like Norway. It's super calm and peaceful. So my fish aren't going to survive. So they started to put a huge investment using the government funds to create a specific line of genetic stock of salmon for Scotland that would not be invasive to the environment as well. So they're modifying the Norwegian strain. So lots of new innovations in that area. Yeah.
Great. And around fintech innovation, has Umitron or in your different capacities, have you been involved in financial solutions for that particular segment?
Not directly, but as Davis mentioned earlier, big data is the way to go, and a lot of it can be monetized. Where we've been playing the biggest role for fintech, if you will, is working with insurance, and in a way as well, banking and finance institutions that would require those insurance products as a precursor to offering loans.
Great. So you are using data to create solutions, insurance solutions, to
Exactly.
to enable banks to lend to that particular segment.
Correct. So what we're doing with the farm is we're using our technology that's installed there to build a farm profile. So now these institutions would know how much fish they have in the water, how these fish are feeding, what is the amount of feed wastage, environmental performance as well, because of one of our services. And the last part of that is tying it together with the retail marketplace. They know how much these fish are worth at a particular time, especially if prices are seasonal. They know how those fish are are performing over time. And I guess they could also project in the future, because now you've got a good harvest plan in place, what the collateral would be if they were to put up part of their farm.
Okay, Joyce, may I ask, so data is useful, and all of us recognize that data is useful, and it's especially useful in creating these profiles that lenders or financial providers can leverage to create suitable products. But we always see sometimes there's a disconnect in that, or it's difficult to get to a point where the financial service providers come on board and begin to use that particular data to provide services. Could you maybe speak to that? What has your journey around that been? How long have you taken to get to the point where you're at? And what motivated the different players to want to work together and even leverage your data? Are there any pointers that you could provide for anyone wanting to sort of bring the market together to leverage data, to marry it and stitch it to financial service providers?
Certainly. Well, I think out of all the production systems, as most people could attest to, aquaculture is probably one of the most risky compared to like the likes of poultry, beef, especially if you're operating offshore, where the environment can be very unpredictable, it can sometimes even be very volatile. And during the course of our interactions with producers, we realized that these farmers, you don't qualify for insurance, partly, like we said earlier, they don't have enough data about the environment. No one knows what the risk exposure is. And having a lack of data means you don't have a good foundation upon which you can improve. So we realized we had the expertise to help them do that, to start the data collection process. You don't need to have a good, robust one, but you need to start thinking about collecting it. And the easiest way for them was to do things that understand their own farm profile a little bit better. So things like Pulse was born. We wanted to keep the baseline features free, because we believe that knowing your farm in that the point at time is very important, and you shouldn't have to pay for that. But if you want to access more consultative services, that's where we can come in, and it's a paid service. And then moving on to how we convince the insurers. Insurance is all about risk, right? An insurer will not insure you if they think that you're super risky and it's dangerous and they have to pay out claims for often. So the more data you have available, the better you understand the risk profile. And once we manage to convince the insurers that the data we have is accurate, is viable, it's very detailed, and we've got it across not just a single farm, but at regional level as well, it was natural for them to realize that, oh, it's an additional data source for their own risk visualization and insurance design. It actually didn't take them very long to say, oh, this is great. You know, a farm that was previously uninsurable could even now be considered for very basic coverage. And that means they can do other things like access bank loans, scale up, get technology that's very important. In some countries, they won't even let you access funding if you don't have the good data and all of that insurance, basic insurance in place to ensure that you're risk-free. So it didn't take very long. I think it was within half a year, we had already gotten one of the largest insurers in Japan to partner with us to firstly review their insurance products. Is it a good fit? Like, is what they're creating as an insurance product even suitable for market? If it's not, then what can we do to make it better? What can we do to make sure the people who need it the most are protected? And for what are they being protected against? Yeah.
Thanks, Joyce. That's quite insightful. So having covered the aspect of leveraging data for creating financial solutions, Dave, may I come back to you and maybe ask you, one of the opportunities, or rather one of the pain points that both of you noted was market. So access to markets. Could you talk about how you are enabling that, or rather filling that gap?
Yeah, thank you very much, Shelley. Market revolves around data altogether. It is, normally the challenge about linking technology with the market and fintech is the kind of data that you need. So data that is generated both at the demand side and data that is generated both at the supply side needed to find a way of talking together on your platform, and that is you can use that to drive market. So again, if you look at developing market from scratch when it comes to the aquaculture sector, where also farmers are sparsely distributed in different sections, the infrastructure around that has to complement the technology solution that you are using to create that market. And that infrastructure includes both the software and the hardware. The hardware in this case will be the cold chain facilities. If we are operating in a fish world or in aquaculture world, that you need to bulk the fish that is being produced. But again, the development of the cold chain facilities need to be backed by the data coming from the production side. So you get a good estimate of how much fish you are able to bulk or aggregate from a particular section of farmers, and routing that to market, through either further technology that allows traders to access fish at the comfort of their phones, or coming up with distribution outlets so that you then have the product or the produce brought closer to the rural market centers. A case in point of Aquaculture, where we are developing fish bulking centers and also establishing fish outlets. And through those two, one bulks the fish and one distributes the fish to the traders. But on the other side, we are also still infusing technology, a USSD platform that allows people, especially women and youth fish traders, to order the fish on their platform and choose the point of access. So we are able to provide multiple sources of fish available to traders at the comfort of their phone. So yeah, we've successfully infused technology and infrastructure around it to see. But again, I say we started more from the production side because we, by getting to know how much farmers are producing, we get to know how much we can produce, push into the market, and basically how much infrastructure we need to put in place to absorb the amount of fish that we anticipate now and in the future. Yeah.
Thanks, Dave. That's interesting, that perspective, in that you need the supply side to sort of understand and inform the solutions in the demand side, so access to markets. I guess I'll run the same question to Joyce, and it's interesting to hear from different markets and different perspectives. Joyce, could you maybe touch on how you've enabled access to markets for the fish farmers that you work with? Are there models that could be adopted in East Africa or applicable to East Africa?
And I guess where we were very lucky was that in Japan, seafood is everywhere. You know, everyone loves seafood, everyone loves salmon, sashimi, right? So it wasn't that there wasn't distribution channels were available, but it was about helping the consumer to make the right choice. Don't just go for products that are, you know, imported, support local, support sustainable, but there wasn't really an avenue for consumers to make that connection. And certainly Japanese consumers don't know where their fish comes from. You go to a supermarket, it's very unlikely for you to see the farm name listed on that product. So what we wanted to do was to spotlight the people who are doing things right and they have the right mindset. So we created a new distribution channel called Omitasachi. And when you scan like the QR codes on that, you can actually log into the farm in real time, assuming it's daytime, and see what the fish are doing in that cage. So there's the traceability angle, is the data angle. We've got that connection there. You can also, in some supermarkets, feed the fish to understand where your food comes from, because a lot of people, for them, agricultural illiteracy is really rife. You know, I've heard people who don't even know that milk comes from cows, things like that, or that sashimi comes from a fish. So we're trying to make that consumer connection for them and to help them understand that their choices have an almost direct impact down the value chain into the way we choose to farm food. And if more and more people are supporting the right things and the right practices, then the farmers could be encouraged to grow as well, because it's supply demand, right? And I think that also ties in with David's question about, would there be a space for multiple marketplace platforms? And I would say you can't do without multiple marketplace platforms, because one platform can't service everyone. You've got Amazon that does like bulk, Taobao does like bulk, but then you want people who are emotionally invested to helping the industry grow sustainably without any adverse impact on the environment, right? So we're sort of having that focus. And to do that, you need a lot of data, you need a lot of traceability and accountability across the entire value chain.
Thanks, Joyce. So I keep hearing data being the foundation, and I guess it's more like technology to provide the data, and then the data becomes the foundation upon which you build this, or you explore these other opportunities. And before I go on with the next question, so we're in the point where anyone is free to ask any questions. You could raise your hand, you could put your question in the chat box. I have one more question before I open up the panel to everyone. So we keep hearing about this aspect of markets and the profile of small-scale farmers being very similar in Japan and Kenya. So what might the structure of marketplace platforms serving them look like? E.g., and you mentioned Amazon, could an entity like Amazon easily incorporate aquaculturists in future? Or is there space for multiple marketplace platforms? So like different entities providing different marketplaces, or do you see more with being an, is it easier for one to incorporate all of the different aquaculturists? And please, Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say when I started Aquaculture, I was envisioning Alibaba system And in the Alibaba platform, or Alibaba e-commerce platform, I envisioned a case where a trader looking for fish somewhere in the rural area can connect with a farmer looking for a market, and the two could meet virtually over the phone or something and trade. In which case, the trader will pay on our platform. We will confirm to the farmer that the payment has been made, so the trader will go and pick fish. Well, that worked to the level to which it can work, because then a lot of dispute resolution has to be put in place to solve between differences between what was paid for and what has actually been received, or the quality of that has been received. So that obviously didn't work. It's also because of the production system and the infrastructure we have in Kenya. Might not allow that to happen in the aquaculture. Maybe it can happen in the motor industry or something like that. Then we moved on to the Amazon kind of system, where we said, okay, we have to find a way of investing in the infrastructure to first be able to aggregate this fish from the multiple farmers that we are dealing with in bulk, grade the fish, and then when we use bulk SMS system to channel the stock of fish that we have to the multiple traders that we will be dealing with, then when they trade with us, they trade based on guaranteed available fish. And we will not need to hire a lawyer in all cases to solve a dispute, in which case our system will be efficient and traders will be happy. Farmers will also be happy. Why? Because then there's bulk purchase of fish from their farms. And that one of bulk purchase is more important for the farm, because then he gets to reinvest the money in the whole of it and gets the money in bulk. So if you look at the big e-commerce platforms like Amazon and Alibaba, they still have a space to play in this sector. And there's also still room for Aquaculture and Omitron to play around and and serve the market. But really, if you look at the ultimate game in the future, is whoever will have the system that can work efficiently, sustainably, will have the most out of this this entire process. And so what any system that is being developed in the aquaculture sector, unfortunately in Kenya or in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa per se, it is almost required that you need to develop a system that works from end to end, because the fragmentation of the sector is just too much. Each part of the process that the fish moves from the time it is hatched, I mean, even before the hatch, even when the parent stock arrives, the brood stock arrives, it's already fragmented enough to the time you hatch it and the time it's on your table for food. So how do we, does that mean the sector is good for multiple players to come along, and big giants like Alibaba and Amazon, will they be willing to invest in those rural level of production so that there's vertical integration of the technology? And so there's multiple avenues through which other players can play into.
Yeah. That's great, Dave. So what you're saying is that there are very many gaps because of the fragmentation can be filled by different players that work together. Or if a larger player is willing to invest from an end-to-end perspective, then and make that efficient, then they may be game for them as well. It depends on who gets there first.
Let's say so.
Great. And Joyce, do you have any different sentiments around that?
I think we were quite ambitious. Obviously, it would be great to be like an Alibaba, but I think it's also impossible. We don't have that kind of scale. But we actually put ourselves in the gaps, and we took advantage of the existing stakeholders that had the infrastructure in place. So like large supermarkets that already had cold chain processes, they've got the physical stores. And if they didn't have an online platform, we gave them the online platform to sell our product. And because we did it during COVID, is you can imagine you can't do physical sales as well to help boost product, right? So we used our our data scientists and our engineers were very creative. They created virtual salespeople. So you could go to a store and you don't have to talk to a person in person. You would talk to like 2 dolphins on a screen, and they would interact with you and share with you what the product was. So we sort of plugged those gaps, especially during a labor shortage. So we would tell them, you don't have the salesperson, you don't have a person who can talk about seafood and pitch it, we'll do it for you. So I remember I was a dolphin for like the better part of 6 gaps, and we realized that we had the expertise to fill those gaps. Yeah.
Great. So you fill the larger sort of value chain gaps, and also leverage the players that were already building or had infrastructure that you could take advantage of, but also provided solutions that would link the two of you to more cohesively provide for the market.
Exactly. We don't want to dominate them. We want to work in partnership. Yeah.
That's important. I don't know if we have any questions from the audience. So there's one from Bobby, and he's talked about, given fragmentation and constraints on suitable water availability, how many more suppliers could ideally participate in aquaculture relative to the status quo?
I think the aquaculture space is still very, very wide in Africa. So despite the fragmentation, you have an increasing population that is starting to heavily rely on aquaculture as a source of fish. And so that brings in, again, opens up the fragmentation further, because then there is still a challenge, really. If you look at the feed production aspect, there's still a challenge, really, in terms of top quality feed manufacturers reaching rural smallholder fish farmers. Majority of the top quality feed manufacturers end their game at medium to large scale farms, fish farms. And that's not the case that's gonna run forever in Africa, or for a long time, for the foreseeable future. You're gonna have a mix of large scale farms, very many medium scale farms, and then extremely many smallholder fish farmers, giving rise to fragmentation, but also giving windows for multiple suppliers to come and take advantage of that. So yes, there is relatively a lot of space still available.
Great. And there's one more from Dave to Dave around the minimal capital cost of starting a small aquaculture farm in Kenya.
Yes, this is what I started saying, but the word small is very relative. But let's assume small is about 5,000. No, that will be too much. 5 tons in Kenya. The minimum you could start if you are doing pond-based farming, you need about at least $10,000 for that. On the other side, if you are doing cage fish farming, at least $25,000 would be needed to establish a small aquaculture farm.
Then there's one from David Ferrand. For both, in the longer run, how will smaller scale farmers remain cost competitive with large scale? How will they compete and remain cost competitive?
From the Kenyan context, the bitter truth is that if these smallholder farmers don't access the good quality feed and adapt the right good aquaculture practices, they're going to be out. That's just the bitter truth. There's no way of sugarcoating it. They have to use the right feed. They have to adapt the good aquaculture practices. If they do so, then the other bit of it that needs to happen is they must move from peasant farming to small commercial farms. That way, then, if you enable farmers to achieve that and bring in a little bit of financial support and market as an enabler into the whole process, then yes, they will start being competitive with the large scale farms. Yeah, so that's the thing. There has to be some fundamental change in the way smallholder farmers do their work, without which then there's also a level to which you can burn money as a smallholder farmer. After a while, it starts catching up with you. So you'll have to make a choice between either burning money, which you won't have then, or adapting radical changes in the way you operate your farm, the way you access your inputs, and the way you manage the fish market for you to remain competitive with large-scale farms.
I'd like to give the opportunity to the facilitators to maybe summarize what some of the key takeaways were, or some of what the highlights were. At the same time, we'll run a poll to just get your perspective on which areas do you think the TECA founders should explore or prioritize. I'd like to hear from marketplaces. Maybe Joyce, could you maybe give us what your group highlights from your group?
It was very much a sharing session, but I reckon one of the most interesting things was, would cost always be a factor in consumer choices? Would consumers be willing to pay a slightly elevated cost if they could understand the story behind that production, that product? And to be honest, I think that the answer is yes. If you can tell that story right and you can justify that with traceability angle, certainly consumers would be willing to pay slightly more. And we've actually done the same for most of the countries that we're operating in right now. We've seen that trend.
Thank you, Joyce. Could we move to group 2 around financial products for aquaculture? David?
Sure, yeah, happy to. And just before responding to the question of that group, let me just say, part of the purpose of the groups, as everyone knows, is to meet other people. So in our group, we had a fascinating mix of someone who was an aspiring TECA entrepreneur, together with someone on the call who actually lived in Japan for 6 years, but is now based in Nairobi and is about to join something in Mombasa linked to conservation, right? So this is an example of the connections which we hope will happen in the TECA community. So surely what we focused on was, first of all, considering what sources of data there might be in order to think about building financial products. And someone mentioned in Kenya, FinAccess is a large-scale data set, which would be perhaps large enough to give granularity around aquaculturists as a sub-segment profile in terms of incomes, financial products used already. And that could be a good starting place in Kenya and potentially other countries where FinScope type surveys have been done. So there might be something out there for founders to look at, first of all. Then we talked a bit about 2 areas of products which the conversation among the panelists, which we all, I think, really appreciated, highlighted. The one was insurance. Joyce spoke explicitly around that. And the question is, can you get granular enough risk data to overcome the fears that Joyce told us? She scared us. She said, it's the riskiest area of agriculture. And we thought, wow, that would scare off any insurer unless they could get better information about exactly what type of risk and how much it is. And then secondly, of course, credit. Dave told us it takes between $10,000 and $25,000 to start operations in this area in Kenya. And that sounds like a credit deal. And someone in our group suggested, therefore, ways of perhaps a credit scoring solution, Dave, that might be even added to your platform, because you could add in data around what type of feed they're using and things that help mitigate risk and assure the lender that this is a small aquaculturalist who will be around in the future, not knocked out, as you told us some of them will be in future. So that's a quick readout from our group, Shirley. Thank you.
Thank you, David. That was quite inciting. I think the third group around data, Dave? Sorry, Dave, you're on mute.
I'll let David share what we had from the group. David, go ahead.
Thanks for passing me the hot tilapia. Thank you. So I wasn't prepared with the remarks, but we did discuss both the state of big data or even databases, not even big in any model in Kenya, which Dave assures that there's just not that much historic data. And in their case, the data set they've been capturing is mostly temperature as well as amount and type of feed. So there wasn't that much data to start crunching on the fly. So we then shifted to what other types of data sets could we tap, right? Could we either create or find? And one that we've heard about is satellite imagery that can actually capture your fish pond and in its completion, and that data can actually be used to do some estimations of the quality of the water. Then we went into the question of what sort of sensors could we insert into the pond. I think we talked about cameras, but the cameras, apparently even Google AI engineers can't quite tell tilapia from catfish. They don't quite know those two types of fish. Which is basically a training question. Andy, who just graduated as a machine learning engineer, was suggesting, why don't we look into sonar? Could we have a sonar sensor? We were not qualified to answer the question, but it sounded really nice and well connected to Joyce's dolphin salesman. So they have the sonar on. So that could be something to add. And we're also thinking, sonar, maybe oxygenation level, and a few other elements, but we didn't go very deep into understanding what sort of data sets will make sense. Dave, anything, or Nelly, anything I might have missed?
Yeah, I think what also came out clearly is Africa is virgin with this kind of machine learning or technologies that will start documenting the kind of fish we have in Africa and having data traceable that can really help in building the aquaculture system. So it's one area that should really attract a lot of focus from funders who are able to drive some level of funding towards capturing native species of fish in the sub-Saharan African continent. Part of the continent, yeah.
Thanks. I'm almost tempted to ask Joyce if they've explored the option for the sonar, because these are some of the things we're supposed to identify as questions, or what more do we need to explore out of the opportunities coming out. Joyce, do you maybe wanna, I see you've unmuted. Do you have something to say?
Yeah, actually we have tried sonar, but sonar only gives you one tier of data, this density, and where that density is located, whereas cameras give you a lot more information with just one data stream. So sonar is useful, but it really can't tell you anything much more than that. It can't tell you health data. It can't tell you, how fish are feeding at that point in time, what they look like. So we kind of gave up very quickly on the sonar idea, even for our shrimp product, where historically most producers now are using sonar. We've totally deviated from that and created something totally novel and new to track fish, shrimp feeding.